Welcome to today's webinar, and I apologize so much for the technical difficulties we had this morning. Thank you for your patience in sticking it out. Today's webinar is starting a life science spin-off company, and this is the second event in our new life science commercialization webinar series that will run through March 14th. I'm Rebecca Norman, your moderator and webinar organizer. I work as innovation consultant for the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center. We are taxpayer funded to provide consulting, training, and market research services for clients throughout the state. Our market research resources allow SDR and STTR clients to develop commercialization plans with the latest statistics on the customer market, competition, and trends in the state of the art. So please take a time to visit our website when you have a chance, ASBTDC.org, to learn more. Before we start today, let's take a moment to make sure everyone is ready and familiar with GoToWebinar. You'll notice that you have a control panel in the right side of your screen. You can minimize the panel by clicking on the double arrow button in the upper left-hand corner. Expand it by clicking on that same button. We are going to take questions throughout today's presentation, so feel free to submit those at any time, and I'll collect those at the end. Dr. Gray will have the opportunity to respond to those in our Q&A session. So let's get started. Today's panelist is Dr. Nancy Gray. Dr. Gray serves as the Director of BioVentures at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. She came to UAMS in February 2015, Southern Research Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, where she was Vice President for Corporate Development. Nancy has 30 years of experience in the biomedical industries. Her breadth of experience includes medicinal chemistry research, management of pharmaceutical research and development, business development, licensing, intellectual property management, and business operations. Work has focused mainly on the central nervous system diseases and resulted in 3 products being accepted for clinical development in a period of 5 years. Dr. Gray's work was also instrumental in the successful development of 2 marketed second-generation antihistamines, Allegra and Zizal. Most recently, at Southern Research Institute, Dr. Gray was responsible for leading efforts in establishing corporate development opportunities and initiatives, including new technology development, mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliances, joint ventures, technology licenses, and divestitures. Dr. Gray received her PhD in medicinal chemistry from the University of Illinois in 1982 after earning the degree of Bachelor of Science in Chemistry at Bucknell University. She is an author on over 20 technical publications and an inventor on more than 30 issued U.S. patents. So Dr. Gray, I will now turn the presentation over to you. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca, and hopefully everybody can see my slides and hear me all right. I'll skip the about me. So today I'm going to talk about starting a life sciences company, and I'll go through briefly the types of life sciences company, but for those of you participating, I'm going to focus specifically on healthcare companies and will not really cover agriculture companies or other non-healthcare focused companies. We'll walk through some of the risks and rewards, some of the critical factors for success, talk about a little bit about business models and business plans, and a few closing thoughts. And as Rebecca mentioned, you can submit questions throughout, and we'll have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to address those questions. So, types of life sciences companies. These are probably an overgeneralization, but I've bucketed them into 5 categories. The first being therapeutics, and therapeutics companies tend to come in different flavors. You could be a small molecule therapeutic company, or look at biologics, or perhaps it's a vaccine. In the devices arena, those go all over the map as well. They can be non-invasive devices, simple wearables. Minimally invasive, these would be things like catheters or IV lines or things like that. And then you have your implantable or your so-called invasive devices, and examples of that would be stents and heart valves, hip replacements, joint replacements, and things like that. Those would be considered invasive because they remain in the body. In the diagnostics arena, you can be a diagnostics company that actually sets up a laboratory facility and runs the diagnostics on behalf of clinicians in your own laboratories. You could be a company that supplies kits to other laboratories to run your particular diagnostic. Or you could be a reagent provider. You could be a provider of antibodies or enzymes or other such reagents that are used in diagnostics in the various clinical labs. There are services companies, and I'll distinguish these services companies from the clinical lab diagnostic companies. And those services can range from discovery tools, sort of screening technologies or whatever that you do on behalf of other parties. They could be non-clinical development. These could be companies that focus on doing toxicology studies or other such studies on behalf of third-party clients that are looking to assemble their package for submission to the FDA to begin clinical trials. Or you could be a clinical development company, a contract research organization that manages clinical trials or interfaces some way in the clinical development arena on behalf, again, of other clients. And then the final category that I have is information technology. This could be a company based on bioinformatics. It could be an information technology company focused on process management, things like proprietary IT for addressing clinical trial management or hospital systems, patient records, and things like that. Or it could be consumer or patient-facing. These would be so-called applications for perhaps better management of diabetes or wellness parameters or things like that that are meant to be to the direct benefit of consumers and patients as your end users. So what are the risks involved in life sciences companies? And I've tried to find some common risks across those 5 categories of companies. And the first is Mother Nature. And Mother Nature likes to throw small life sciences companies curveballs all the time. And when you think about it, if you're a therapeutic company and you're transitioning from something that you're doing on a plate, perhaps, and then you take that into animal studies, and then you take that into maybe 200 humans, and then on into thousands of humans, there's going to be a bump along the way, perhaps. As a matter of fact, in the therapeutic category, for every 10,000 compounds that goes into human clinical trials, only one emerges at the end as a product, as an approved product. And that's because Mother Nature does something along the way from the first human to the last human enrolled to trip up the development. The other risk is just the regulatory environment. Healthcare, for obvious reasons and for very good reasons, is a regulated industry. And that includes well-defined FDA requirements and processes, but also it's not a solid, this is the way you do it. Regulations change over time, they drift over time. The FDA grapples with better ways to evaluate therapeutics or diagnostics or devices, etc. So the regulatory environment is not static, it is dynamic. And then you have the whole reimbursement and payers, the insurance providers, the people that are actually going to perhaps cover the cost of your prescription or the cost of the device or the cost of the surgical procedure, etc. The reimbursers and the payers are a risk factor. And then finally, and probably the one that gets the most focus, is simply access to capital. How are you going to fund the development of your particular health science product, complete from conception to product launch? So if you look at the risk profiles of the 5 categories of companies, they do segment. Healthcare IT companies I view as a lower risk company for reasons that we'll discuss in a minute. Services company I have in two places. There are certain service companies that would be low risk, and these would be in the category of services that are provided mostly as research tools. However, the services that you might provide that are subject to FDA regulations, for example, if you're running toxicology studies that have to be done in accordance with good laboratory practices, or if you're a service company that's running clinical trials in accordance with good clinical practices, you have to follow not only the FDA regulations around those things, but also you're subject to FDA inspections, announced and unannounced. And so the whole regulatory risk raises you to what I would call a medium risk category. In addition to that, the diagnostics companies and the device companies have sort of a medium risk profile in the spectrum of life sciences companies. And then finally, you have the therapeutics, which are probably the highest risk companies. And so to see why I've categorized them like this, no one risk is the same risk for all, except for perhaps the capital risk. So if you try to profile the 5 different categories of companies against the common risks that I list here, you have a different profile depending on the type of company that you are. So for example, if you're a therapeutics company, one of your biggest risks is Mother Nature. As I said, if you have the case of a compound that's going into clinical trial, you have a 1 in 110,000th chance that Mother Nature is going to let you glide smoothly through and get to market. And then development of therapeutics, it's a long process. It could be up to 12 years, but it's also very, very, very expensive. And current estimates have the development of a therapeutic now on the average can be $1.2 billion. And so that's pretty daunting if you're just starting out in a small little laboratory facility trying to make it to market. The regulatory environment, of course, it's a risk. There are certain hurdles you have to overcome, certain efficacy points, certain safety points that you have to have, and the regulatory environment can shift on you. For example, well, we'll move on and we'll come back to some examples later. Now, if we look at the devices, the profile is a little bit different. Mother Nature isn't as complicating for devices because you're mostly dealing with, sort of physiological factors, not fundamental biology. But the regulatory environment is in flux around devices, especially in the United States. Again, access to capital is a persistent issue because for invasive devices especially, you have to do human clinical trials, which are very expensive, which means you're going to have to raise additional funds compared to products that don't require testing in humans. But also an emerging risk is the reimbursement of these devices. Just because you have approval doesn't mean you're going to get reimbursed for your product, and that leads to certainly a risk in the market. Plus, devices can be a very, very, very competitive arena, especially if you look at the wearable devices and you're looking at the focus being on health and fitness rather than curing a disorder. But there are rewards. Certainly, the healthcare market is huge. In the United States alone, in 2015, the healthcare market was $3.2 trillion, and it goes up every year ahead of inflation. The other reward is you tend to be solving some real problems, and if you really are solving a true problem, you actually have less market risk. And I use the example here, if you're developing a non-addicting treatment for chronic pain, you're going to have a market if you're successful in getting it through the regulatory process, as opposed to a new fitness wearable, which, there's multiple designs, there's multiple providers, and you would really have to have a key market differentiating factor for your product to enter that market successfully. The other reward is, it's also the punishment, is the solutions tend to be complex solutions. and therefore they're hard to duplicate. So the more complex it is, if you successfully overcome the complexity and deliver that solution, it's going to be hard for others to duplicate that. Plus, usually complex solutions lead to opportunities to protect your solution with intellectual property. So this can be in the form of patents, which of course do definitely help, but it also, you can get protection just from brand. And I'll use an example for that. So for example, if I came up to you one day and we're just chatting and I said, oh, by the way, you know, I'm an inventor on fexofenadine patent, and most of you would say, oh, well, yeah, that's nice. But if I came up and said, you know, I'm an inventor on the Allegra patent, you know that brand, you're out there. And so branding can be an important marketing strategy for you. And also there's the opportunity for monopoly on products. Certainly in some senses, the patents give you that monopoly. Somebody can't come on the market with your patentable device until your patent runs out. But also there are certain opportunities for regulatory exclusivity. And that is you can get patent life extensions depending on how long it takes your product to become developed through the FDA system, and also for the patents to issue in the patent office. And so there are opportunities in this market for gaining and sustaining a monopoly on your product. And then when you have a monopoly, of course, you tend to have higher margins. So what are some critical factors for success and things to consider? And some of these are unique to healthcare companies and some really aren't. So we'll sort of highlight them. First of all, it's the team. Who is in your company and who is not. This could be the strength of your intellectual property. Do you have patents? Do you have copyright opportunities? Can you build a picket fence of intellectual property around your approach? Do you have robust data that people will believe? Customer collaborations can be critical to success. Also, you really need to have a very strong regulatory or market strategy in order for you to have that roadmap to get you to the end game. And then finally, of course, it is access to capital. So the team. And I'm going to distinguish this team from the team that, if any of you are familiar with the I-Corps program, the NSF I-Corps program, it's really quite different. The I-Corps program requires that you have a 3-person team that is comprised of an entrepreneurial lead, a business lead, and the principal investigator or the scientific lead. And that's the prescribed team. However, in reality, if you're starting a company, you really want to start with the right team. And the only way you can understand what your needs are is to have a plan. So you need to start with a 2-year plan and say, what do I need to do in the next 2 years to move my product forward? It may be a whole host of technical studies. It may be I really need to raise cash. It may be, depending on the stage of your technology, I need to figure out how to get into the clinic in a year. And depending on what you need to do during that 2-year window of time will determine what you need to start with. Do you need a full-time technical person, or just somebody part-time, or a consultant? And so these are the questions you have to ask yourself, and there is no right answer. It is case specific and is driven, again, by the plan. You do have options. Of course, there's always, you could hire full-time people. Sometimes you can hire them part-time. You could look for consultants. You can look for advisors. You could even look for temps. I have one spin-off company here that hired a temporary CEO to see them through a 6-month period of capital raise. And so there are different ways you can build your team, and you really need to build the team based on your plan and not vice versa. The other thing that people really should think about is who is on their board, whether it's the board of directors or the board of advisors. And you really want to form the strongest board that you could have, because they'll do 2 things for you. They'll tell you when you're on the right track, and they'll tell you when you're on the wrong track. And sometimes that's hard to hear, but you do want a strong board, and most importantly, you want to have at least a few members on your board with industry-relevant experience. So if you're a device company, you probably want at least one person on your board that has worked in a device and understands that world. Or if you're a therapeutic company, similarly. But the other thing is pay attention to personalities, because you know, when you're starting up a company, you spend long hours together, and it doesn't mean you all have to have the same personality. Probably that would be a bad thing. But you need to know that as a team, as a startup team, you really need to be able to work with each other even in those times when you don't like each other. And so pay attention to personalities, and if you know that there's somebody who's going to drive you up a wall, then they're probably not the right person for your company. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual property, and this doesn't apply to all of those categories of companies, but it does perhaps. So if you think of intellectual property, most people think of patents. That's sort of the, you know, first thing that comes to mind. However, there are other types of intellectual property that you can use to protect what you have. You might have an opportunity to protect copyright. This copyright actually is used more and more now in software applications. Trademarks and brand names. I mentioned that before, the Allegra versus fexofenadine perception. Trademark strategies, if you really want to lock in your brand. Know-how. Know-how is very, very big for service-based companies. You know how to do it, and you know how to do it better, faster, whatever. But know-how is also intellectual property. The way you protect know-how is you don't tell other people how to do it. But it is a recognized form of intellectual property. Then you need to develop your intellectual property strategy. If you have one patent, that's fine, but you probably want to surround it with a bunch of extra patents. Whether if it's a small molecule, you might want to just say, okay, I'm going to go over here and make something that looks similar, and it has the opportunity for another patent. And even if you don't exploit that patent, it keeps other people from making a similar molecule and then going on to compete with you. So you want to create a picket fence of intellectual property around yourself. And that picket fence can be patents, a combination of patents and copyright, or patent and trademark, or even patent and know-how, or copyright and know-how. You also want to watch for opportunities for extension of exclusivity. This could be things in new uses for your product, or simply a different formulation of your product, or a different presentation. So you always want to look for opportunities for improvements, because improvements is usually new intellectual property. You want to be concerned about territory. A lot of times, especially in the university environment, people think of the United States as the patent of the Holy Grail patent. If I get a U.S. patent, it's fine. No, it isn't. You really can't think, if you want to be acquired by somebody eventually, that your product is only applicable to the U.S. market. And likewise, if it's applicable worldwide, you want to protect your property, if you will, in the key territories. So for example, again, with a therapeutic, you know, you would want to protect that in key European countries, Canada, Australia, Japan, the major markets. You can't afford to go everywhere, but you have to, you know, weigh cost versus protection. And so you need to really pay attention to what your intellectual property strategy is with respect to where you want protection in the world. And then the timing, you know, depending on how long it takes products to get to market, timing can become a factor. And so you want to be keenly aware of what your patent life would be, or what your copyright life would be, or your trademark would be, and how long does it need to be. And so you need to worry about when you want to file new intellectual property versus keep it as a trade secret for a while, etc. And so these are all sorts of things that you need to build into an intellectual property strategy. And then we talked about robust data and data. So healthcare is a science-driven industry, regardless of the type of company that you're involved with. And what you want to make sure of when you have a product idea or even a product prototype is the strength of that data, and you want to independently validate it. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to send it out and have somebody else reproduce the results. It could be that, you know, the science upon which your company is based was published in a very stellar journal, or the PI won an award or something like that. So you want to make sure that there's some type of independent validation of your scientific data. You want strong market data, not just, okay, I did a Google search. You really want to go out and sample the market and talk to people and get that market feedback and assemble your own quality data, not just what you can read about online. And it's important to continue to gather data, not just after you get started and say, I'm on my way. You need to continue to watch. You need to watch the scientific arena. Who else is playing in this space? You have to look at product development and who else is developing products. And I'll give you an example from my life. So back a few decades ago, we had a product in moving towards clinical trials, and we were coming up upon the need to sign a $250,000 contract to have the material made in a manner in which it could go into the appropriate animal studies as well as human clinical trials. 24 hours before we were going to sign that contract, I was perusing the patent literature, which is very exciting, and found that the molecule that we were developing was just published that day in a Merck patent application, and I wasn't working for Merck. And so it meant that I could not get a patent on my molecule. They got us, right? We couldn't do it. And so we saved by just saying stop. We're not going to push the button on that. We saved the company $250,000 on a dead end just because I read the patent literature that day. So we got lucky, but you have to monitor what else is going on out there constantly and continuing to gather data. You got to keep an eye on what your competition's doing. Are they ahead of you? Are they behind you? Because even if they don't have the patent on your molecule, they could still be competition, and you need to watch what they're doing. And then markets change. Markets change. You know, one day the market might really welcome. I mentioned, you know, if I had the non-addicting treatment for chronic pain, well, if somebody got on the market and then another person got on the market, then the third one probably isn't going to be as marketable as if I were the first or second. And so you really have to be keying into changes in the marketplace as well. Customer collaborations can be very, very important. And a lot of people, I think, overlook this because they want to control their baby for a while. But why would you want a collaboration? Well, first of all, they could be a source of non-dilutive cash. You could have a joint project where they're paying you to test their thing in your system. And you do that, and they pay you to do that, right? Plus, if you sign a collaboration with a well-known third party, for example, it really is a sign of technology validation, even before the experimentation. Because if you are talking with a larger company about collaborating with you, they're going to have to believe in your technology before they're going to agree to collaborate with you. So this way, it's sort of, I always call it like getting the Merck or the Pfizer seal of approval, that they believed in this technology enough that they wanted to sign a partnership with us. And that level of validation can actually help when you're out looking for financing, because it's third-party validation, again, of your technology or your approach. They're also an opportunity for market expansion. So obviously if you have a technology platform that could be used in 3 or 4 different ways, and I'll use the example of, say, drug delivery. I can put maybe 20 different drugs in my delivery system, but as a small company I can only afford to move one forward, so I'm going to move that one forward. But this company over here can use my technology and move their thing forward, and then this one can move this one forward, and pretty soon you have your product moving forward, but you have your technology moving forward into other applications. And so especially for platform kinds of technologies, collaborations can be fantastic for having new product applications going on in parallel to your own effort. And it also gives you the opportunity for international expansion. For example, a lot of times a company in Japan will license a technology specifically for the Japanese market. They will develop it along for Japan, and you will develop it along for the rest of the world. And so it can give you some international expansion. And then finally, sometimes the best collaborations are your exit strategy. Again, an example from my past. I was working for a small drug delivery company, and we had 2 different partnerships with the same company. And the company actually liked the technology so much that they bought us. And I continued working after they purchased us, but they can ultimately be your exit strategy, keeping your investors, of course, very, very happy because that is their return. So think about collaborative opportunities and think about them pretty early on. And then you really need to have a clear path forward, both from a regulatory perspective and a market perspective. Even if you're a therapeutic and you're not going to be on the market for 12 years, you really need to have those plans in place. And I can't urge small companies enough, especially you know, in the healthcare market, to make sure you hire a subject matter expert early on that understands regulatory environments. And they're changing because, and so these experts, they don't have to be an employee. There are plenty of consultants out there that will work with you. But what you want to do very, very early on is hire that subject matter expert, because your regulatory requirements will impact your development activities, which then, of course, impact the amount of money you're going to need. And so it's a knock-on effect. So definitely make the effort to understand the regulatory requirements, and don't just read about it on your own. Hire that subject matter expert. It is dollars well spent. And then you need to define those steps to meet those requirements and ultimately build them into a business plan. And we'll talk a little bit later about business plans and business models. But in the healthcare market, the regulatory requirements are a key component of your business plan and your product development plans. And also look beyond the United States, because you want to make sure that if you're spending all of this money developing a product for the U.S. market, that you have the regulatory requirements of Europe in mind or Asia in mind. You can't do all things all at once, but keep those in mind and understand what the similarities are, so that if you have a study that in the U.S. requires 30 test subjects but Europe requires 45, run the 45. And so understand outside the U.S. what's necessary. But also it gives you the opportunity to capitalize on accelerating your time to market. For example, in the device category, not giving any company names away, but there was a company that had designed a brand new heart valve and of new materials, and it was more robust, etc. And they looked around and they saw that the regulatory environment for implantable valves was shifting in the United States. And so they made the risk decision to move forward and say, we're going to first commercialize in Europe. And so they followed the European regulatory pathway, got their approval, and they were on the market with their valve in 2011. They're still waiting in the United States because of the different requirements. And so sometimes looking beyond the United States, you find a faster way to market outside of the U.S. So don't ignore Europe, don't ignore Asia as possible opportunities. And then don't overlook doing those comparative studies early on. For devices and diagnostics, the FDA focus is kind of shifting. It used to be, okay, primarily safety, and yes, it works. Safety and it works. Now they're shifting to, yes, it's safe. Does it work better? And so you now have a slightly higher hurdle to overcome in the devices and diagnostics. So even if you have a better way of diagnosing something, if the FDA doesn't think it's better, it's not going to get the FDA stamp. Likewise, even beyond FDA approval, reimbursement decisions are switching heavily to comparative effectiveness. I'm sure you all know about, you know, if you have your medical insurance, there will be certain pharmaceutical products that you can get and certain that your insurance won't pay for. And that's because they look, reimbursement is dependent on cost and efficacy and comparative effectiveness. And so if something's just as good as the other, they're not going to pay for all those, especially if something's more expensive. So you have to do those comparative studies with an eye toward always trying to prove that you're going to have a better outcome, either an earlier diagnosis or a better, more robust device that lasts forever, what have you. But nonetheless, you really need to start looking at those comparative studies and making sure that you're delivering a better outcome than the competition. And then there's the big one, and that is access to capital. You rarely need to plan your capital needs on a milestone basis. No one is going to say, okay, here's all the money you need, go off and, you know, when you exit, give me my money back. Very few companies ever are one and done, and by that I mean one round of financing and then we're done. For two reasons. One is nobody's going to give you that amount of money up front for the most part, and secondly, investors prefer to meet the milestones with you. And so they will say, I might give you $2 million, but I'll give you the first $500,000 and you get to here. And then we'll see where we are. They prefer to invest in tranches. So what you want to make sure that you do is you plan your capital needs, not what I'm going to do to get to the end game, but what do I need to get to the next value add step. And so, so when you plan your capital needs, also plan them in accordance with your technical requirements. And then diversify. Some capital raising efforts, you're selling equity in your company, but there are grants available, SBIRs and STTRs. Certainly ASBTDC can really help you in the SBIR, STTR arena, and I'm not going to talk any more about that because they're far more expert than I am. And then we already talked about collaborations. Collaborations can bring R&D funding into your organization, and it doesn't cost you an equity. And so you want to diversify your sources of capital and your capital raising efforts. And one other thing is, one other point I'd like to make is there's been a preponderance of new accelerator programs across the nation and business plan competitions, and they have great value, but not as funding vehicles. They have great value in helping you focus, helping you make business decisions, helping you plan, helping you test markets, but they're not a funding vehicle. And there are some companies out there now that you can see they run from accelerator program to accelerator program, and that's all they do. And while they're doing that, they're not moving their product forward. They're collecting $50,000 checks along the way, but it's working for food and it's not really getting them to the end game. So don't fall into the trap that, oh, I could win $125,000 in this business plan competition, but at what opportunity cost? And so don't use accelerators and business plan competitions as your funding vehicles. Use them for all of the value that they can offer you, but don't view them as funding vehicles. So just talking about equity capital, what kinds are they? And this is very, very key for healthcare companies to understand, because healthcare companies tend to need more capital than other types of companies. So seed funding, that's made at the earliest stages. That just maybe is getting that reproducible result or what have you. Usually that comes from friends and family, and maybe adopted family, I don't know. But also don't overlook regional opportunities through here, the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. They have different grant programs beyond the SBIRs and STTRs. And so there are opportunities within Arkansas, if you will, that can provide seed funding. It's not big dollars, but it might be enough to get you going. The next round, when you really are talking, maybe I need about $1 million or so, then you're probably talking angel round. And angels are wealthy individuals. Sometimes they come in as individuals, but the trend is actually now they're pooling their money and are sort of organizing into angel funds. And we have several angel funds here in Arkansas. And these are usually used to bridge you seed funding and friends and family funding to going out and getting that big bolus dose of cash and in the venture capital arena. And so angel rounds should be bridging rounds. And then finally there is venture capital. Now venture capital, you have to keep in mind, they look for an exit in 5 to 7 years. And so if you put that into the context of a therapeutic company, they're not in to see you to get to market. They're into an exit strategy, which is probably in therapeutics going to be an acquisition. So that's their investment timeline, is 5 to 7 years. It used to be 3 to 5, it's now more 5 to 7. And they prefer to invest in tranches. So if you have a venture capital company that says, yeah, okay, I might put up to $2 million, I'm only going to give you this much until you get to here and that much to get to here. So venture capital, you go there when you think you're far enough along and you need that extra infusion of cash and expertise to get you really to your exit. So how do you access equity capital? First of all, you need to do your homework. Decide if you're really in the realm of angels or whether you're VC venture capital ready. And because you don't want to go talking to venture capitalists seriously, you get to know them, but seriously about investing if you're too early stage for them. And then keep in mind, not all venture capital firms are created equally. Some restrict the types of companies that they invest in. Some won't touch healthcare companies. Some will only do healthcare IT. Some will say, well, we'll do therapeutics devices, but we don't want to do diagnostics. Do the homework on the types of companies they want to invest in. Also think about the size of the investment that you're going to need and what stage it is. Is it your first round of venture capital raise, or is it your third round? Because different venture capitalists have different risk appetites. And so some prefer to come in maybe Series B or C and not Series A. And so you have to know what their investment appetite is. And then how much money they put into their investments. Do they put in regularly $250,000 and not to exceed $1 million? Or do they put in $2 million not to exceed $10 million? And so you need to know what that profile of that venture capital firm is. And then finally, what's the makeup of their portfolio? If you have one that invests, say you're a diagnostic company, and that company invests in diagnostic company, and you look at their healthcare portfolio, and they have 6 diagnostic companies and 1 therapeutic company, they might not be interested in another diagnostic company. And so pay attention to what the makeup of their current portfolio is. Then how else do you access? Look broadly, not to have anything negative say about Arkansas, but Arkansas does not have a lot of venture capital companies, and more importantly, it does not have a lot of venture capital companies that invest in the healthcare space. So you're going to, by definition, have to look beyond the state borders. And so you're going to have to get out, get on airplanes, etc. at some point when you're ready for venture capital. And but the best way to meet a venture capitalist is to use somebody you know that knows a venture capitalist. You network to them. It's the best way to do. Personal introductions work the best. And going back to my statement about picking your board and picking the board member and having some of the people from the right industry, that's when you can start to rely on those board members, or people within the community even, but your board members should be able to help you network into those VC firms. So switching gears a little bit and talk about business models and business plans, and specifically what works and doesn't work in healthcare. So business plan and model. So what is a business plan? It's really applying the scientific method. It's about developing a hypothesis and seeing if it's accurate in the marketplace. So you ask a question. Does the world need this? You do your background research. You say, okay, well, the world needs this if it looks like that. And you construct a hypothesis. And then you go out and you do that experiment. You say, okay, would you buy this? Then you analyze. You draw a conclusion. You learn from it. You might refine your idea. You might alter it. You might expand it. You might toss it in the circular file. But it's an iterative process, and so you go out and then you communicate your results in some format. But it really is applying the scientific method to planning and to modeling. And then the business plan is really your written hypothesis, and we used to joke that whenever you wrote the business plan, it was going to be obsolete within 24 hours. It is a dynamic document. It's not like I'm writing my 5-year plan and put it on the shelf. It's a dynamic document. And so it really is your hypothesis around, and then as data comes in, you may have to tweak your hypothesis, alter it, refine it, or say, this isn't working. And so, people hear a lot about the lean canvas approach, and there's differing thoughts on lean canvas business plan. I have my own personal bias, I will say. But a business plan is the written description of the business's future, including what you plan to do and how you plan to do it, including how you're going to bring the money in and how much money and from whom, etc. Business plans are simply a guide to show you how you're going to start today and get to that point 3 to 5 years out. Right? That's all it is. Now, there is this debate, well, do you really need a business plan versus do you just need a lean canvas plan? And lean canvas plan is sort of the model that's been adopted by a lot of the accelerator programs that are out there. The NSF I-Corps program is based upon it. The NIH I-Corps program is based upon it. And that has become the trend. And it's a very wonderful tool. And the essence of both the lean canvas plan and the business plan is understanding common business points and thinking through them. Who's my customer? Who's going to be a collaborator? Who do I need? What do I need? Both do that. The business plan, you take your hypothesis and you probably develop a 30 to 50-page business plan with quite a bit of detail. The lean canvas plan takes the hypothesis and you have a 1-page business model. So what's the difference between 1 page and 30 pages beyond the 29 pages? And it really is the amount of detail and planning, because it's not, this is my model, but the business plan says these are the steps I need to take to get there. And so there's more definition. And I have to say, my bias is I always like to see a business plan. So what is the right approach? Well, it really depends. You have to think about what is the stage of development for your idea or product. If it's just a concept, or is it something that, now I'm going to take into people, whatever. What is the stage of development for your idea or product? How much money do you need to achieve your next milestone? Because how much money you're going to need is going to define your audience. Am I going to go talk to my dad? Am I going to go talk to the angel fund? or am I going to go out and find venture capital? And so that comes down to who's your audience for that. Is it an elevator pitch? Is it a full-blown 1-hour presentation? So who's your audience? And that will tell you, do I need the business model or do I need the business plan? And actually, really the right approach is both, because each has its own right time and its own function. Again, right time, early stage, lean canvas. It's not until you really get down the road and really start spending time, money, and energy that you probably flip over and need the business plan. Lean canvas is very valuable for idea vetting, or when you face the need to pivot. So something happens and, oop, that's not the right product. What should we do? How do we refocus our business? What have you. Lean canvas is valuable for idea vetting when you need to pivot, or when you want to expand, you want to add a new product. And so tremendous value. But the business plan is valuable when you're raising that serious cash and when you need to capture a true written operating plan and make sure, especially if you are highly regulated, such as a therapeutic or an invasive medical device, you really, really want to have that business plan in place. So just a few closing thoughts, and I think I'm on the 1-hour schedule pretty well. Why would you do it? Well, most people get into healthcare startups because they have a passion for improving human health, be it through fitness, access to medical care, or treating diseases. Motivation is very, very often for improving human health. If you don't have that, you're probably not going to survive. But you're also solving real needs rather than just augmenting lifestyles. It's not the new fancy car, it's not the new fancy widget. It is real needs. Healthcare obviously would not be $3.2 trillion in the United States if there were not real healthcare needs, and then people are spending money on those needs. Also the challenge, I think that's what kept me in it for so long. It is a challenge. It is a challenge, and it's not for the faint of heart or the people who want that sure thing. It requires a true entrepreneur to go in and take on the challenge. And usually what I say to people when they come to me, and I said, well, why not do it? Why not do it? Why not try? What are all the reasons for not doing it? And if you can't come up with reasons for why not, then if one of those other 3 bullets apply, I think you can move forward and be quite successful even if the company isn't. And with that, I will turn the floor back over to Becca to field any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gray.